Sayan.
And we're good too.
Well, we're good to go. Um, okay, fine. Um, let's see. Um, ready?
Yes, we
Go
are.
ahead.
It's January 15th. You're back with us at Give the People What They Want, the best weekly global news program on the internet with Prashant and
Hey.
Zoe from People's Dispatch and me, Vijay from Globetrotter. 15th of January, an important day. Today is the day, the assassination day of Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg. We remember them fondly. We remember them in anger as well. They were killed at the end of the German Revolution. Rosa Luxemburg fought for 30 years to try and ensure a revolutionary understanding in the social democratic movement. Karl Liebknecht, her comrade, both of them incidentally born in 1871. Her comrade Karl Liebknecht was the only member of the German parliament not to vote for World War One. These were very important people, and we remember them with great fondness. On Sunday, January the 17th, will be the 60th anniversary of the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, a great patriot of the Congo, a great patriot of Africa, working people around the world. Belgian colonialism, the CIA of the United States couldn't tolerate this large part of the world, the Congo, rich part of the world. They couldn't tolerate it being independent. And just at the moment of independence in 1961, he was picked up, he was assassinated 60 years ago on Sunday. We remember Patrice Lumumba, Karl Liebknecht, Rosa Luxemburg with great fondness. Not so fond, Prashant, this week of a Supreme Court order that came out in India. Not so fond of it. The Supreme Court decided to weigh in on the most significant global protest happening on the planet right now, the protest of Indian farmers. Supreme Court decided to weigh in. This protest has been going since at least the 26th of November. What did the Supreme Court say, Prashant?
Right, Vijay. So this was a very unusual intervention because the aggrieved party, in this case, the farmers who are unhappy with the farm laws passed by the government, they've been protesting for over 50 days in the bitter cold amid the rain on the outskirts of Delhi. The farmers didn't want the Supreme Court to intervene. It was just some fringe groups, a couple of public interest petitions, and the Supreme Court approached the whole issue with a very paternalistic point of view. So they did give a rap on the knuckles of the government, say that you did not really do your job well. But at the end of the day, their solution to the problem, the farmers have been asking for the repeal of 3 farm laws. Their solution to the problem was to set up a committee. Now, the ironic thing about the committee was that the 4 members who were nominated to be part of the committee, all of these members are those who have supported the stance of the government favoring these laws. So just to remind our viewers, the farmers have been opposed to these laws because of the fact that, one, they really fear this will drive down the prices that they're going to get for the produce. And in point number 2, they fear that there's going to be greater corporate intervention in agriculture. So the big corporates are going to basically take over the whole agriculture sector. They're going to throw huge amounts of money. And at the end of the day, farmers will be left with no bargaining power at all. So farmers across the country protesting very strongly on this. And when this went to the Supreme Court, the farmers have made their stand very clear that we want the repeal of the laws. And they're like, we want the government to talk to us and address this issue. Whereas the Supreme Court kind of waded in, gave some moralistic messages. In a very disturbing message, the Chief Justice observed that, they may conclude that women and older persons need not be there in the protest, which is quite alarming, because as P. Sainath, we'll come to him later, but P. Sainath said in an interview that women form a huge number of the farmers of India. And when you say women should not be there in the protest, or when you say that old people who for decades have been doing agriculture, why should they not be there in the protest? So the Supreme Court actually approaching this whole process in a very problematic way. They just wanted the protest to continue. They were looking at it from the perspective of, law and order, and not really in terms of the issues which the farmers were facing. So at the end of the day, what happens is that we have this committee. At least one member of the committee has recused himself. The other farmers are very unhappy. They said they're very clear that they're going to continue these protests. And their main protest plan is that on the 26th of January, that's India's Republic Day, 26th of January, which marks the day when India's constitution was officially adopted. So on the 26th of January, they are going to enter into Delhi on their tractors to make their point, because they are very clear that they cannot be, sort of shooed away with promises of bureaucratic procedures and committees. Their demands, it's one very interesting thing about this protest, that the demands from day one have been very, very clear. So they're not, there's been an amazing amount of unity, for instance. Hundreds of farmers organizations across the country coming together on this platform. The government has tried to divide them, defame them, and yet they're united. They are determined that they are going to continue on these protests, and we'll see what happens in the coming weeks. 26th January, a very important date for this reason. So that's where we are at right now.
No, it's 26th of January is a landmark day. Of course, it's the day when the Indian Constitution, comes into effect in 1950. It's such an important day. The farmers are picking up on that. People should go to newsclick.in. That's newsclick.in. They are one of our partner organizations. Of course, you can continue to look at the coverage at People's Dispatch as well. The Constitution, I mean, that's what they're going to pick up on. They say, let's march into Delhi on the day of the Constitution because we have rights. During this pandemic, so many countries have basically stripped people who are trying to fight for the good side of history of their rights. We've seen this in Belgium, police violence. We've seen this in Denver, Colorado. Zoe, what's happening in these two cases broadly in the attack on people's rights?
Yeah, Vijay, I'd first like to start by talking about the case of the Comrades from Denver. If anyone was tuning in last night to the Breakthrough News live stream last night, they would have caught a peek of a segment of an interview with the Comrades from 3 members of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. I'm just going to start and kind of move backwards in the case. On September 17th, 3 members of the party were arrested and slapped with insane charges, kidnapping, a couple of felonies, a couple of misdemeanors, all adding up to around 60 years in prison. And so, okay, what are these party members doing? What are these, leftist activists doing? They've been organizing on the front lines of protests in Denver and Aurora, Colorado, demanding justice for Elijah McClain, who was assassinated by the police in August of 2019. And I think, speaking about kind of this crackdown on people who are fighting for justice, on the people who are demanding the most basic rights and human conditions of dignity, amid the pandemic, but, beyond that, because these are issues of racist policing, police brutality. And these organizers are, facing 60 years in prison. They're continuing to fight this case. And I think the kind of contrast between the treatment that these organizers are getting, who, have organized peaceful demonstrations, sit-ins, mobilizations. I think a lot of people around the uprising in the United States probably saw images of this massive protest with violins, because Elijah McClain, who was killed in August, was a violin player. And these organizers in Denver, facing 60 years, whereas we see, of course, people who stormed the Capitol, who sat in Nancy Pelosi's chair, facing, a couple years. And I wanted to draw some attention to this case because, as they're continuing to fight these charges, as they're continuing to kind of insist in their innocence, while also demanding justice for Elijah McClain, of course, the cops are still free. They have not been pressed with any charges. These organizers are the only people who have actually seen legal repercussion in the case of Elijah McClain. Tomorrow, wanted to tip people off to a really important documentary release that's happening January 16th, 2 p.m. Eastern time. Breakthrough News is launching their documentary about the case. And I think it's, a really important case to keep in mind and to highlight, because as people across the world are resisting repression, are resisting, attempts by states to crack down, we need to be highlighting these cases, and we need to be cognizant that in our struggles for justice, there are repercussions, but we have to fight back against them. And that the intended effects of these arrests, which is to demobilize the movements, demobilize people, intimidate them, threaten them, must not be had, and that we must continue to rise up. In Belgium, what people are mobilizing against this week is that a 23-year-old man was killed in police custody. This was on January 9th. And this has caused an outroar across Belgium. People have been on the streets demanding an end to racist policing. And I think we see a continuation of the protests that happened this summer, because as we know, the murder of George Floyd in May, of course, unleashed a global rebellion. And so we're seeing protests this summer in the US and France, in Australia, against racist policing, and people are continuing to mobilize against this. So we're seeing the protests in Belgium. We're seeing protests in Ireland as well against the brutal killing of a mentally ill man in outside of Dublin. And of course, organizers are seeing backlash from this. So definitely keep following these stories. Follow the case of these Denver activists who are continuing to fight for justice for Elijah McClain and for their own innocence. And we must continue to resist racist policing and demand that people who are committing these crimes, be brought to justice.
I suppose that's important. But if we now leave the confines of Denver, Colorado, and go to Washington, D.C., where, as you mentioned, on January 6th, there was a sort of explosion of an American B movie into the halls of the Capitol. It looked like a fantasy science fiction thriller come to life, being shot in real time. Didn't look real to most people, not to me certainly. Never seen anything quite like this. People dressed in furs and so on, gallivanting through the Capitol. It didn't look like a revolution. It truly looked like a Monty Python film. That being said, Mike Pompeo has not allowed himself to be constrained by the fact that by the time we come back to you with give the people what they want next week, by the time we come back to you, Mr. Biden will be the president of the United States, not Mr. Trump any longer. Nonetheless, Mr. Pompeo, the Secretary of State for Trump, has gone after the adversaries of the United States. And I want to be quite advised in the use of this term, not the adversaries of the Trump administration, because there is some unanimity in US foreign policy. Gone after Iran, gone after China, and gone after Cuba and Venezuela, because these are related. I just want to quickly explain what Pompeo has done, because I don't think this is being adequately covered. They quickly designated Ansar Allah, which is a group that part of the fight against Saudi Arabia is led by Ansar Allah group, largely but not entirely of the Houthi people of Yemen, designated Ansar Allah a terrorist organization. Now, there's no appeal for this, and it means a lot of things. One of them is it basically legitimizes the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi war in Yemen. Legitimizes it, makes it part of the war on terror. Secondly, for the first time in decades, the United States has said that US diplomats can engage with Taiwanese diplomats without any restrictions. This is a direct challenge to China. This has happened again in the last few days. And then finally, the United States has started the process to designate Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism. Now, Obama removed Cuba from that list. That's important to bear in mind. By the way, Cuba is not designated already. There's a process. They've started the process. It's actually not entirely clear that the United States is going to be able to complete the process in the last few days before Biden comes in. But the reason Pompeo gave for putting Cuba back on the list is very important. Because you see, there's no evidence that Cuba is involved in anything terroristic. In fact, what is Cuba involved in? It's involved in sending the Henry Reed Brigade of medical doctors to help people